Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We'll give everyone a few more seconds to log in and then we'll get started. So good morning and welcome. My name is Pam Clark-Reidenbach. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence, more commonly known as NICNE. We are your host for today's event. I want to thank you for joining us this morning for a discussion on the eviction moratorium and its lifting, scheduled for April 3rd in Illinois. We have gathered a tremendous panel of experts to share their wisdom with you. So please put any questions that you have in the chat box and we'll do our best to cover those throughout the session. So let's get started. I'm going to ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves and the organization that they represent, but here's a list of those individuals. So let's go ahead and start with Sarah and we can move down the list. Sarah Brinkman.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Sarah Brinkman. I'm the Executive Director for HomeStart. And we have offices in Rockford and Freeport. So we work regionally, providing housing education and counseling resources for anyone moving into whatever their next housing decision. So if that's from subsidized rent to market rate or market rate into home ownership or trying to save their home for foreclosure. In 2020, we were one of the community outreach agencies for the statewide rent assistance program. So that meant that we opened our facilities despite COVID, but we, in a very COVID-friendly way, but we opened to help people complete their applications, tenants and landlords, so they could get their paperwork in. We had 760 households apply for that program. The rent program was open for 3 weeks in August. And then IDA processed everything, or the Illinois Housing Development Authority, our statewide agency, processed everything from there. In the past, we were more in the home ownership discussion, but we have worked with Housing Action Illinois, so I'm excited to see Bob on this call. Our organization in Zion had hosted some events about eviction in Winnebago County because even pre-COVID, our eviction rate was higher than any other rate in the state. Winnebago had the highest percentage of evictions. So knowing that and heading into this crisis where even more is at stake for our low-income families, we were happy that there was a resource we could step into. And then in the next coming years, in this coming months, we'll again be an outreach agency for the statewide program, but Winnebago County has its own money this time, and I'm sure Jennifer will be telling you about that. So thanks.
Sure. Jesse, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse Hodiern. I'm the managing attorney for Prairie State Legal Services office in Rockford. Prairie State Legal Services is a nonprofit law firm. We're a legal aid organization. We provide free legal assistance and representation to primarily low-income individuals and seniors. We focus on areas impacting people's basic human needs. If there's a legal issue impacting somebody's basic human needs like health and safety or housing, Prairie State likely will take on a case like that. To give you an example, we do a lot of eviction defense, we do mortgage foreclosure defense, we do public benefit terminations or denials. We also do a lot of legal work involving domestic violence and family cases too. So, so that's Prairie State, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jesse. And Alan?
Hi, I'm Alan Zeiss. I'm the Executive Director of NICNE Homes, formerly Winnebago County Housing Authority. We have affordable housing and resident service programs across 6 counties in Illinois, and we use federal and state subsidy dollars to do that with. And just recently, over the course of the pandemic, we've been working on a paperless system so that residents and applicants need no longer come into our offices. And we'd started that just before, so it's worked out well. And we would invite anybody who has populations that they're working with that they can just do it right through our site now.
Great. Thanks, Alan. And Bob Palmer.
Yes, I'm Bob Palmer. I'm the Policy Director at Housing Action Illinois. We're a statewide advocacy and capacity building organization. We have about 150 organizational members around the state and many more allies. And we work on a fairly regular basis with many of the Rockford area groups on the call today, and individuals like Jennifer, Sarah, Alan, and Jesse. We do a lot of work with housing counseling agencies, and we also have an AmeriCorps Vista program where we place AmeriCorps members in our member agencies doing direct service projects. But I'm on the call today to talk about kind of our state and federal level advocacy work and how it intersects with the topic of eviction. So thanks for inviting me.
Sure. And Jennifer.
Always do this. Good morning, Jennifer Jager with the City of Rockford. In addition to being the city, our department is also a community action agency serving Boone and Winnebago counties, and a COC agency serving Boone, Winnebago, and DeKalb counties. So our reach is beyond the City of Rockford. We've partnered with Winnebago County Housing Authority to handle the application process for their portion of the new Treasury Rental Assistance Funds. Outside of the Treasury funds, outside of Rockford Housing Authority and Winnebago County Housing Authority and NICNE are obviously the largest rental assistance providers in the area. We are the 3rd largest rental assistance provider in the community.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. And last but by no means least, Laura.
Good morning. I'm Laura Snyder, CEO of the Rockford Housing Authority. We currently provide affordable housing solutions to just about 1,400 individuals in our family and elderly disabled low-income public housing units, just over 2,000 vouchers in our Housing Choice Voucher Program. In addition to that, we have established MOUs and partnerships with 16 community partners to help assist us in providing human services, job education, training, and overall social services to our communities.
Great, thanks, Laura. And thank you to all the panelists. Obviously, we have convened an extraordinary group of individuals with tremendous knowledge in this area. So those of you that are on the call, if you have questions specific to the low-income people that you're serving, please pop those into the chat. We'll do our best to answer each and every one of these questions. We want to make this conversational as well as valuable to you in serving people in our community. So let's get started just by providing a background. Give us a little bit of a background on the moratorium and its lifting on April 3rd. Can you give us a little bit of a background, Jesse, on in general about the moratorium?
Sure, thanks. Well, we're coming up on just about the 1-year anniversary. I think the moratorium was initially in place March 20th, 2020 through Executive Order 2010. It has been extended a number of times, including most recently, it was extended by another executive order through April 3rd, 2021. So it is still currently in place, and there is still the possibility that it will be extended further beyond. We can't say with certainty what will happen after April 4th or April 3rd. But basically, the moratorium was put in place to prevent the filing or commencement of residential evictions for anybody who owed money due to a COVID-related hardship, and also just in recognition of the public safety and health risk that it would cause to have people evicted, potentially homeless, or having to be forced to cohabitate in larger groups in their housing. So the moratorium currently does prohibit evictions based on owing rent to anybody who is defined as a covered person. The definition is in the executive order, but basically it kind of boils down to that person having a COVID-related hardship, but also is at imminent risk of homelessness, has made all attempts to pay as much of the rent as they can in consideration of their non-discretionary expenses like utilities and other bills. So if the tenant qualifies as a covered person under the definition of the executive order, then the current moratorium would prohibit the commencement of an eviction against that tenant. It also does prohibit the commencement of evictions against tenants who do not owe rent, with a caveat or an exception to both categories. And there's an exception for evictions if the tenant poses a, quote, direct threat to the health and safety of other tenants or an immediate and severe risk to the property. So that's kind of, I guess, in a nutshell, what I would focus on as an introduction.
Great. Any other panelists want to add to that information? Bob, anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I just want to add, obviously, nobody wanted or envisioned that, the pandemic would go on as long as it has, and hopefully with the vaccine distribution, the end is in sight, and we kind of put it in the rear view mirror. And we know that, obviously, we're aware that the moratorium has caused lots of challenges, particularly for rental property owners. But I think just want to say that and remind people that, the moratorium was put in place because of the public health demands that, many people who get evicted don't have anywhere else to go. It's not safe to, force people into a double dup situation or into a homeless situation. It's hasn't been safe for tenants or rental property owners to, go to court and be, especially considering the number of people who have lost income. And if we didn't have the eviction moratorium because of all the unpaid rent until we've been able to secure this federal rental assistance, if you think about the number of cases that would have been, in court, that would not have been good for the public health. And then obviously the worst case scenario of law enforcement having to go to, someone's home and then forcibly remove them and their, possessions during a pandemic just did not make sense based on public health. So it's great that obviously we've been able to secure rent assistance, and Illinois committed a lot of rent assistance last year. And then there's, I'm sure we'll get into it, more and more rent assistance coming. That is, getting the rent paid is the main way to avoid the storm of evictions that could potentially come without those resources.
Great. And you want to talk about the resources that you popped into the chat box here, Bob?
Oh, sure. I double checked that they worked. But the first one is just a link that takes you to the webpage for the Illinois Housing Development Authority that explains the moratorium. I think actually they need to update their webpage since the last extension, but the state eviction moratorium does go through April 3rd. And again, I think we're advocating at Housing National Illinois, joining with others, that it be extended again, especially now to get more rent assistance out there. And then the second link is a kind of a statewide website. It's one of these chatbot websites where people can go in and type in their questions and needs, and they'll be hopefully directed to resources to assist them, but this website can also help people fill out the declaration form that they have to provide to their landlord, stating that, based on their income and being below a certain level and their loss of income and their, effort to try and make rent, they have to attest to several different things, and they provide that form to their landlord, and then they are protected by the moratorium.
Great. Any other panelists want to weigh in on just the sort of the background on the moratorium? Okay. So let's jump into some of the other questions. So we talked about how the moratorium is to potentially be lifted on April 3rd. We also heard how people were going to advocate for the extension of that, but you have to begin thinking about strategies, right? What strategies are being discussed to support low-income individuals and families when it is lifted? Anyone want to jump in? I'd love to hear from all of you on this one.
So I'll jump in, Pam. One of the things that we are working on right now with Prairie State Legal Services and the county is the ability to have intake done directly at the courthouse if somebody shows up for eviction, so that we can work on the problem right then and there with the new funding, and hopefully provide the judge with what he needs to put the eviction on hold.
Great.
I'll just jump in off that. I think that, Prairie State is working pretty closely with the 17th Circuit and specifically with Judge Balo, who covers the eviction call, and Judge Doherty, the chief judge, to establish, currently we have an eviction help desk that we're operating remotely. A lot of court is still being done by Zoom. And so that means that honestly, a lot of the tenants are not even in person at the courthouse. And so what we've done is we've provided a staff attorney to staff a help desk Monday and Wednesday morning during usually the first return, where it's the time the tenant is coming to court for the first time, where they can be directed to go through our screening process and meet with an attorney right there while they're in court via Zoom. If the tenant is there in person, we also have provided some equipment to the courthouse so that tenant in person could still meet with a Prairie State attorney that morning using the equipment that's on site at the courthouse too. So we're hoping too that working with the city to have those rent assistance options or resources available through the courthouse or at the courthouse. But also hoping to have additional conversations to establish a bit more of a formal diversion program or a mediation program through the 17th Circuit as well.
And our agency, when we get notice of what the statewide rent program would be, so that'd be for any residents outside of the county of Winnebago. We've committed to working with Antoinette and Jennifer on how we're promoting programs so that as much as possible, we can make this or reduce the confusion. There will be confusion, but one thing Antoinette and Jennifer we've talked about, we're a block apart. So maybe, we'll have staff at their place at different times, or maybe they'll have staff at ours, just to make sure the statewide program is going to be a little confusing. Winnebago's and Jennifer's office would be the first place you want to call because theirs, I believe, will be open to tenants first. And tenants are the urgent ones, right? Tenants are the ones that are facing eviction or the problem of, will I have to leave my home? Whereas the statewide sounds like they're going to start with the landlords and start with the landlord starting the application. So again, it's going to be a real choreographing of the messaging to make this as not confusing as we can. So it's just really important that with the city of Rockford and Winnebago County, it sounds like the housing authority is also helping maybe how we do that messaging, start with them, but then always call Home Start if you're not finding, if your person's outside of the county of Winnebago, and we'll do what we can to get answers.
And then if I could add, actually making it even more confusing, although we're glad to have all these resources for the, maybe Jennifer can say more about this, of the portion of money from the federal funds that were approved in December of last year. Of the portion that's going to the state, the majority is going to the Illinois Housing Development Authority, and they're going to use it, I think, very similar to how they had their 2020 program with an online portal. But then they are, this year also money from that pot is being allocated to the Illinois Department of Human Services that will be available through the homeless service provider continuum of care networks. And the state has also committed some funding for case management to help like Department of Human Service agencies be able to have, at least somewhat more staffing to get those dollars out the door and provide support for people who need rental assistance. And there also, is some increased funding for the kind of legal services programs that Jesse was mentioning. And I know that the Department of Human Services was going to try and get like the contracts out very soon to the continuous care. If I believe that's correct. Is that correct, Jennifer?
That is correct, Bob. And because we're touching both sides, the direct treasury to county and the COC side, we're hoping to create a streamlined process for everybody as possible to make sure that we are getting access to everybody in all 3 counties to the funds who need them. We'd like it to look sort of like a one-door thing for people, and we're doing our best to sort that out right now.
Great. And I noticed in the chat too, Jennifer, that someone asked about NICNE. Can you make sure that everyone knows who NICNE is?
Yeah, so NICNE is the new department head for human services for the city of Rockford. She has a long history in the community, primarily in the health area, but she's a true advocate and is a welcome addition to our department.
Yeah, I've worked with her on several occasions. She's delightful and very professional, extraordinary. Yeah. Laura, how about you? You want to talk about what strategies are being discussed to support the people that are served through the Rockford Housing Authority?
Yes, good morning. Well, what we've been doing since the onset of the pandemic is just working individually with our residents, putting them in repay agreements. And of course, we have the ability to do immediate rent reductions if somebody experiences a loss of income, and setting them up with other services because of course, when they lose their income, nothing else changes for them. Groceries are the same amount, and day-to-day living is the same. So trying to get them set up with those services. I sit on the board of the COC and working with Jennifer and all those folks to get our folks on that listing of assistance through the city and through the continuum. But yeah, I mean, we have a landlord portal where we are able to reach out to all of our landlords simultaneously and advise them of all the programs that they have, of the applications, and walk them through the application process, and then link them up with services that they need to help our residents. But right now we're experiencing about 12% of our folks have been affected by COVID-19. And the majority of those have gone into repay agreements. We're very hopeful that no one actually sees an eviction because of this. But we also are very excited to see what the program is, the emergency program, and what that criteria is when it comes out from IDA. So
great. And Alan, do you want to talk about Winnebago County?
Yeah, Laura put it really well there a moment ago where, housing authorities are a different kind of animal because we're adjusting our rent to reflect when someone loses income. But early on in the pandemic, when we saw the panic buying in the stores, and we worried about that effect on our residents, that people would go out and take their portion of the money to stock up and then get behind. And once it becomes a big balance, it feels like an insurmountable mountain to residents. So we have reached out to Vista, and we have a eviction prevention specialist that does not only the housing authority, but also in the community. And one of the big needs we saw, of course, is the value of internet suddenly, for people needing health services and being able to get to their pharmacy, being able to get to their family. And so we set up a telehealth program that's an actual site that's partnered with the area hospitals. It's a demonstration program through HUD, and it's part of the Connect Home program that RHA and our housing authority are part of, which is, to target that internet accessibility to residents. And you know what, my computer froze up. You probably saw I disappeared for a minute. I'm sorry. And so forgive me if this was covered, but I know it looked like we were talking briefly about the emergency rental assistance. And I just wanted to add that it is restricted to 80% of area median income for families. So it's going to be targeted to low income. And then there's going to be a preference in the Winnebago one for families who are 50% of AMI, families who've experienced, who've been unemployed for at least 90 days, and families taking part in the mitigating process with court, should it go to the eviction process that Jesse was talking about.
Great. Thank you for sharing. We do have a question in the chat box that says, will people who are undocumented be able to access or receive rental assistance? And if so, where should they go to apply?
I can jump in. They can apply for this emergency rental assistance program.
Good. Jesse, anything else we need to know there?
Just a note, Pam, from Jennifer, if they're not eligible for the Treasury funds, they would be eligible for our community services block grant rental assistance funds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I should say, though, that this is a question that I get a lot. And so unlike a lot of HUD programs, these funds don't have any restrictions on them. And then obviously, though, the agencies might be, across the whole country. Obviously, there's a lot of individual agencies administering the program and coming up with their own applications. And some of them might, inadvertently or for whatever reason suggest that, you have to provide a social security number or something like that. But but people who are undocumented are able to apply and shouldn't. And so there's no restrictions. So.
Anyone else on the panel want to share? We good? Okay. So obviously the audience that we have here today are people that are representing human service organizations and serving low-income families. So certainly we want to talk about and want to hear from the panel as well as the people in the audience on what will be the projected impact on low-income individuals with the lifting of the moratorium, the potential impact.
Well, I'll start. I like to think hopeful, and I was on a call with the National Income Housing Coalition, where who we work with very closely, and I know other people who are presenting today have probably worked with them or with other national organizations, and so so Illinois in 2020 committed more of the CARES Act dollars that were discretionary for rent and mortgage assistance than any other state. And in total, there was about 324 million plus committed, of which 2/3 of that was for rent assistance. The other was for mortgage assistance. And then just for rent assistance, from the relief package that passed in December, Illinois is getting like $835 million. And if I remember correctly, I think this like 560 of that is going to the state. And then the remainder is going to other local communities that have populations more than 200,000 in their county. But then in the American Rescue Act, which was kind of the Biden administration proposal that just passed, there's even more dollars for rent assistance, but also for homeowners and people experiencing homelessness. And there's even money for a limited number of new housing choice vouchers that would go to like Allen's Housing Authority. And so I think there's hope that, with all that funding, if it can get out in relatively expedient manner and really targets those, most in need, the feared tsunami of evictions, as a lot of people are saying, will be avoided. And then one important thing from the December dollars too is that initially all the dollars had to be spent by the end of the calendar year. And obviously want to get the dollars out as quickly as possible. But in the relief package that passed in the American Rescue Act, it was an extension to allow those funds to be spent into next year. And then the new dollars can be spent through, I think, 2025. So again, hopefully, that eviction tsunami will be avoided. But I think still, the longer term question is about sort of, structurally in our society, just the lack of affordable housing and that so many people are experiencing homelessness, and that, even with all these resources, that problem is not, is not resolved.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to, I think that Bob and Sarah had both already mentioned this, but just to say, again, the rent assistance and the moratorium basically, have to work in tandem in a way where hopefully the rent assistance programs will come through and enough assistance will be available and provided to people to avoid the storm or tsunami of evictions. And as Sarah had mentioned earlier, Winnebago County, if we look at pre-COVID statistics for eviction or the rate of people who are cost burdened or severely cost burdened for their housing, Winnebago County has one of the highest rates of poverty, with somewhere around 44,000 people being at or below the federal poverty level. One of the highest eviction rates in the state. Outside of Cook County, I think it is the highest rate of eviction. And under the definition, I believe that HUD, or the Department of Health and Human Services, provides, Winnebago County has approximately 1/4 of its tenants severely cost burdened, which means they spend somewhere about 50% or more of their income on their housing. And when we look at just cost burdened as opposed to severely cost burdened, people who spend more than 30% of their household income, that's nearly half, I think, of all tenants in Winnebago County. So the lack of affordable housing is already there. The eviction rate's already there. And then when we add, in addition to that, just the hardships everybody's faced with COVID, I think there's, the projections, if the moratorium is lifted, I think we're still going to be seeing a lot of people facing eviction and a lot of people facing homelessness.
I think too, the thing in building off what Jesse said, the landlord tenant discussion just in general before COVID, right? As far as legal process for that really always has favored the landlord. So the tenant hasn't had a lot of avenues like a setup mediation program at the courthouse or some other things. So in this moratorium space, good people like Jennifer, Jesse, Alan, and that they're trying to pursue solutions, because long term we've needed crisis intervention in this space anyway, just on how those relationships happen. And now if evictions start to if that's lifted, but rent payment programs are delayed, or there's going to be some avenues in space where the discussion for low income clients is going to get really confusing. And there's going to be some really good tenants who kept all of their agreement, just didn't have the money for rent, that might get evicted. And there might be people that were not good tenants, but that got the rent assistance right away. And now they're feeling empowered to stay in their unit. Like, it's a really weird discussion in there. And I think when the moratorium does lift, Again, all of us, right? We're trying to mobilize as many resources between the mediation and the money and all sorts of things as possible. But the reality is renters didn't have a lot of rights in the first place. And at some point, we're going to go back into that part of the legal system that's always been there. Because in our country, housing is a product. It's not infrastructure, it's a product. So until that discussion's different, we're all going to have to stay right with our people for a long time, even if they get the rent assistance, or it's just a difficult discussion.
I would like to back up what Sarah just said, which is one of the things that we have struggled in the past with in this community is the landlord. The courts do favor landlords. The landlords have the lawyers. Less than 10% of tenants ever have a lawyer. And hopefully this entire event, the pandemic, the rental assistance, can help us as a community come together better on how to protect both tenants and landlords in the future.
Great. Are the conversations including landlords, the work that you do? Alan, you mentioned that landlords were at the table. Is that a part of the conversation in the work that you're doing?
It is. We saw that problem with the emergency rental assistance rollout in other areas where landlords were distrustful of it, excuse me, and not taking part, and the tenants were suffering because of it. I'd mentioned Austin to you before we were talking, where 300 landlords refused to take part in it. So we saw that as essential to the buy-in of the program, help them form the policies for it, and while also protecting it for the tenants. We actually found they were very concerned about making sure that tenants were protected once they got involved and felt they had ownership of the process. And then we looked for kind of a downward promotion of it. If the promotion of it is coming from the landlord association to the landlords, we thought we would get a better buy-in than if we're trying to push it out on landlords. I have to add what I heard from the conversation earlier, what Jesse was talking about, and the rent burden to families in Winnebago County. The combined resources of both housing authorities only serve 3% of that population.
Interesting.
And then I'm sorry, I could also add, when we're talking about the emergency rent assistance, and Jesse was putting it out well, that it needs to be like right in tandem or a step ahead of the eviction moratorium, which is why it's trying to be pushed so fast. It doesn't make a lot of sense after someone's been evicted. But there's a second round that's supposed to come on this, because we realize that with some mountains of arrearages, we may only be pushing the problem down the road just a little bit. And then people are experiencing it again a few months from now. And so the Congress felt that the Treasury Department was the best vehicle for that, because they could get the money out really, really fast. But what's supposed to follow this now is the universal vouchers that would come through the housing authorities that Bob was talking about. They were a hard sell through some members of Congress. So what they did was they put a sunset clause on them. But what would happen is they would help people for about 2 to 3 years, because not every problem can be fixed in 60 days, or 90 days. It could take a few years to help residents a little longer. And so those things working right behind the other will be a helpful impact on this.
Great. Thanks, Alan. Anyone else want to talk about that? Our conversation was around how do we, what impacts do we see on low-income individuals? How do we ensure people do not become homeless? Any other comments from our panelists or questions from the audience?
I would just encourage people to work both with Prairie State and to call our homeless hotline if they're facing homelessness, so that we can try and get in and do diversion before they become homeless and we have to deal with rehousing. Okay.
So what's the first step, Jennifer?
First step, or either step, call our homeless hotline, which is 844-710-6919, and make sure that you are in touch with Prairie State Legal Services to help address the court issues. We may be able to help with funding to divert. They certainly could help with legal services to divert. Our goal is to keep people housed whenever possible, because it is so much easier to keep somebody housed than to have them enter the homeless system and then have to rehouse them. And much less traumatic, quite honestly, for the family.
And I might just add, in terms of the bigger picture, many people on the call today might know from a few years ago now, there was a book that got a lot of attention by Matthew Desmond called Evicted. And that really kind of, among other things, sort of influenced the national conversation around evictions. And then obviously we've had the pandemic since then, but he, using both kind of data and but also personal stories, and looking and talking to and following both, you know, kind of very low income renters or renters in poverty, but also the rental property owners that rent to those types of families in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I think he really kind of dramatized and gave some good insight into this issue. And I think, you know, a couple, you know, key points that I got from reading that book were, you know, what the vast majority of tenants or people, human beings, are, you know, they want to pay their rent. They're, you know, that's what they think of first, with whatever, you know, income they have, is, you know, meeting that basic human need of paying for their housing. And, you know, in our private market, as Sarah was talking about before, you know, they're just, you know, it doesn't work right now for meeting the housing needs of people with the lowest incomes. So you have all these, you know, extremely low income households who are paying 50% or more of their, you know, income for housing. And it's not surprising that when people have situations happen, you know, in their life, they often, you know, aren't able to pay the rent. And we have sort of this contentious, you know, legal system that's built on, you know, the tenant versus the landlord. And we know, and I've, you know, heard them from my, you know, work lobbying legislation in the state capitol. Obviously, you know, there are tenants who don't, you know, follow the lease and aren't, you know, the best neighbor, engaged in criminal activity. And I think they get a lot of attention compared to, you know, the vast number of tenants who are just trying to struggle to pay their rent. And the vast majority of eviction cases are just about people who cannot pay rent. It's not about lease violations or, you know, bad behavior. And, you know, when a family gets evicted, it kind of, another point from the book was that it pushes them deeper into poverty, because they wind up, you know, if they're lucky to get another place at all to live, it's often a worse place in worse condition that even often costs more, because people have fewer choices, you know, in the rental market. And I think, you know, to kind of solve this, when we talk about evictions, it's often about, you know, either the, you know, the bad tenant or the bad landlord. And I don't think that's really a helpful dynamic to have in the conversation, because it doesn't get to solving, you know, the problem for the overwhelming majority of people who just want to have an affordable place to live. So.
Great. Can you, the book again was Evicted, and it's in the chat box, yes?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that. Sarah, did you have something you wanted to contribute?
Yeah, and I think building off your question, like what can people do that are working with people in this situation? As these mitigations start to roll out, as we start to see where the rent assistance applications are open, and, you know, like we're in those process, or you're starting mediation maybe, or talking to a lawyer about your possibilities, it's important to drill home with renters that they need to have some sort of conversation with their landlord. They cannot create a toxic themselves. Like, as much as they are able to influence the relationship, if they can keep an open channel there, it's best for them in the long run. Because if, say, circumstantially, they knew there was a moratorium, they've always hated the guy, they got in some sort of fight and threatened them, the landlord can take this rent assistance money and then still evict them, because they'll have a case for being threatened, and for them for being a physical threat on their property. So this money doesn't mean, if they were to get this rent assistance, it doesn't mean they can be a bad tenant. You know, like, it doesn't give them any leeway on those. The moratorium has given some space, but it's meant to be space for people that are struggling, like Bob's talking about. So it's really important that we're coaching our clients, our friends, our neighbors through, like, I know it's irritating. I know that faucet's been dripping for a while. Don't do anything to his tires. I know that sounds extreme, but like this has emotionally been hard to get through the last year, right? And where you live, if you're feeling threatened about where you're going to sleep tonight, it's hard. That's just hard. So, the more that we're as advocates and as people bringing resources, just helping to do that essential mediation, but just keeping people calm and saying, like, I know it's irritating, but it's a business transaction at this point, and you need to keep an open channel because this rent might help you out and you might get some space, but you cannot give them the power to go back into the previous legal system and get you out anyway. So that's one of the key things I think we have to be talking about, is keeping people. This is a tough thing, and they need to think of advocating for themselves, but in a business sense.
Could I add on to that too? Bob and Sarah are exactly right. I think it doesn't really help to structure the discussion or the relationship as bad landlord, bad tenant. Everybody's feeling emotion or stress or pressure. I will say that in terms of the legal issues that have come up because of this, landlords are trying to avoid the moratorium by alleging pretty much everything and anything is a direct threat to the health and safety of others, or direct threat or to the property, because they're feeling the pressure too to try to get people out if they're not paying or whatever. But also, we are seeing a large uptick in self-help eviction measures from certain landlords who are turning off utilities, who are locking people out of their homes, who are threatening those types of things. And there is a right and a wrong way to go about things in terms of the legal process. And landlords, to remove somebody, have to go through the court eviction process. So, those self-help measures are not okay. Those are things that we do get involved with. In fact, we've had landlords who try to condemn their own buildings just to try to expedite removing the tenant from the property. So, people come to us with a lot of complaints about the conditions of the properties they're living in. And a lot of times those are pretty serious too, in terms of the furnace isn't working, the unit next door, the pipes burst, and so now my water's off. There's a lot going on even outside of the court system right now. But the last thing I guess I would say is, Bob, just to echo what he said earlier about how evictions push people deeper into poverty. Once you get that eviction record, even if the case gets dismissed, a lot of landlords don't look at the actual details of the case. They see that, oh, there was an eviction filed, even if it was dismissed because you moved out or you reached an agreement to pay and stay. Landlords may not rent to somebody who has an eviction court case that shows up. So we do everything we can to advocate for sealing cases when it's appropriate in the law, and hoping that landlords give people a little bit of leniency and some grace in accepting their applications. Same with the housing authorities as well, to look at a case-by-case basis on, does somebody really have a pattern of evictions? Has somebody really owe rent? What's their individual circumstance in taking their applications? So.
I think Bob and I were talking about that just prior to this, and maybe he can help me in explaining it. But I think you shared, Bob, that House Bill 2877 passed that will allow sealed records for evictions.
Yes. So my group, Housing Action Illinois, working with several partners, for actually a few years now has been trying to expand access to getting eviction records sealed. Jesse can talk about this now more probably, but the current law is kind of a little, especially if you're not an attorney, a little confusing and not particularly user-friendly about the standards for sealing eviction records. And one way I've explained it, although being evicted in a criminal situation are very different, but I think like in our state legislature, there was, in recent years, there's been sort of a bipartisan agreement that people with criminal records, need to find employment. And so we should expand opportunities for people to have their criminal records sealed or expunged to help them find a job. And in the same way, because having that eviction filing against you, even if there was never any court order that you'd be evicted because maybe the tenant and the landlord were able to negotiate something or the back rent got paid, the issue got resolved, still you would have that eviction filing against you that would show up when you try and rent an apartment in the future, because a lot of landlords increasingly rely on paying any number of companies $30 or whatever to get a report on their applicants. And these companies collect the data that's available through the various court websites in various ways, and they often present it without really any context for the case. About just as like there was an eviction against me, Bob Palmer. Even some companies might not be careful to make clear there was actually Bob Palmer who lives at X address in Chicago, as opposed to all the other Bob Palmers in the world. So we want to we've had a hard time passing that bill, but we and I'll put a link to it in the chat in a bit, but there's a bill going through the General Assembly, hopefully it'll be voted on in the House today, that especially because of the pandemic and that so many more people being at risk of eviction due to just losing income, through no fault of their own, we were able to get the support we need to get a bill through the General Assembly that, going back to the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020 and going through March 2022, it would seal most all eviction records sort of as automatically, although if it is a case where, it was really a significant health or safety, violation or some other issue beyond non-payment, then, the landlord could ask the judge for that case not to be sealed, or the judge could make that determination. So that's something that we think will be very helpful to tenants. And we don't think it's a way, there's lots of ways that landlords can evaluate tenants through, references and looking at their credit or, so we don't feel like this is really going to restrict landlords in choosing, the tenant that they feel is the best, but it's going to, allow more tenants to kind of not get an automatic no just because they maybe had an eviction filing against them in the past, and they can make the case to the landlord that they're, someone worth renting to.
The way the current law sits is you have to show that the eviction was filed without a basis in fact or law, and that sealing the record outweighs the public interest in having access to the public records. And that is a pretty high burden. It's very difficult. I mean, most of the time we get it sealed, it has to be a really strong case for there being no basis in fact or law. And oftentimes the judge will enter it if both parties agree, but that's a big if. And I'll just say that for purposes of my involvement with advocating for clients to get things sealed or expunged, that's the framework that Prairie State works in, and that because we receive federal funding through the Legal Services Corporation, we can't really participate in any legislative lobbying or grassroots lobbying. So I can't advocate for the Bill 2877, but I can say it would certainly impact our clients.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I was watching a program with landlords and tenants, and they were talking about in this COVID relief fund that they were trying to work with landlords on coming up with some sort of way that they can work with these tenants and giving funding in this new relief bill to the back rent that was owed. And they were just telling the landlords that it would just be more feasible not to put these clients out, because if they can have them sign this contract or agreement or whatever, they would be able to give some funding to the back rent. And I just wanted to know, is that something that you guys have heard about in this new COVID relief fund that has been released?
Who would like to speak to that? Jennifer, is that something that you feel comfortable speaking to?
I think she's generally speaking about the funding that we're talking about now. It is more feasible at this point for landlords to hang in there just a little bit longer. See if we can't work things out for those good tenants who want to stay in their homes and the landlords who want to keep them. And we hope to have this program online by April 1st as we go through this conversation, or now, if you'd like, Pam, we can tell how that's going to roll out.
Sure, that's probably a good transition. Jennifer, go ahead.
So in partnership with the county, we are going to be opening the Treasury eviction program, hopefully April 1st. That is currently our status date. We should be getting press out there shortly. The application process will take place in 2 ways, maybe 3 with the courthouse piece. We are using a software called Neighborly, which is being used nationally by many states and counties to accept applications. It is an online application process. We will also have office hours in our office at 612 North Church for people who don't have access to that technology or who have an impairment that make using that technology difficult. And we will actually do the application with them in our office in person if that is the case. We are, as has been mentioned before by Prairie State and Allen, working with Prairie State and the court system to also be able to provide those resources at point of eviction as well. As soon as we have that website address available, we will be getting it out to the community as quickly as possible. As Alan mentioned earlier, we will be prioritizing people below 50% of AMI, people who have been unemployed for more than 90 days, and people who are at imminent risk of eviction.
Great. And for those that aren't familiar with the acronym AMI,
sorry, area median income. The material that comes out will have income sheets attached to it so people can see if they are eligible, and the software will also screen for that.
I was going to ask Jennifer if you could talk a little more about the eligibility, because it is COVID related eligibility also. So.
It is. Thank you, Sarah. I tend to, everything is COVID these days.
I know, right?
COVID, right?
Right.
So you do have to have a COVID reason for being behind on your rent. That can be loss of income, reduction in income, healthcare cost, inability to work due to healthcare related to COVID. Pretty much all of the categories that would make you have to miss or lose income because of a COVID related incident.
okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And again, if you have questions, pop them into the chat box. I believe we have some questions, Billy, that are in the chat box that maybe the panelists could answer.
We do. Somebody had asked if there was any idea of the percentage of families facing eviction in our county.
Well, I can't really speak to the percentage facing eviction in Winnebago County specifically, but I had seen estimates nationally that somewhere between 30 to 40 million people were facing eviction. You know, right now eviction filings are fairly low just because of the moratorium. But I'm still surprised, to be honest, how many actual evictions are being filed despite the moratorium, with landlords alleging everything is a direct threat, for example. A lot of those cases we won't see in the court records because a lot of them do end up getting sealed because they may be without a basis in fact or law. So it's hard to give a specific percentage, I think, right now. I haven't seen anything specific with Winnebago.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we're still learning as we go, but it was, and this doesn't translate exactly, but there was an article in the New York Times this morning that the um, Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development in New York City alone discovered there's 40,000 evictions being processed with an average of $8,150 in arrearage. And they were stating themselves that they believe that that is grossly underestimated. And of course, they're seeing that it's happening in neighborhoods that were COVID hotspots. So these were places of people who were low income already because they're working in service sector jobs, they're essential workers, and primarily minorities, African American, Latino.
Other questions, Billy?
Yeah, I'm reading through our list right now. Someone had asked, it seems to be difficult for people to get necessary available funds that are out there. And with the impact of people facing eviction, along with people still waiting for unemployment benefits, are there any agencies or programs helping people navigate these funds or navigate access to these funds?
I mean, that seems to be a Jennifer question.
Actually, I was going to toss that to Sarah because Sarah, you guys are serving as a navigator, correct?
Oh, good.
Yeah, correct. We can help people navigate it. What we do is, sort of coordinate what they're doing, think through what they've brought, help them look and make sure they brought the right documentation, those sorts of things. What's tricky right now with the speed that the federal government is asking local and statewide agencies to get money out the door, most of those agencies are having to do in-house portals, in-house systems. And as Jennifer can tell you, with the CARES Act, it went fast and furious. And, it was really hard to watch out for duplication. It was hard to watch out for a lot of things because there just are a lot of individual systems right now. So it's this balance with your clients where it is frustrating because you have to go to IDES for one, you have to go to the human services for another, you have to go to all these different places. The good news is that's the spirit of it is to try and get it out as quickly as possible. Because if we make all these programs coordinate and do one thing, first of all, that would probably take 2 years to get all those privacy agreements in place between all those agencies to cross-reference everything, right? Like, that's why there's all these individual things. And that's what we talk someone through is like, it is a lot of work, but we're going to cheerlead you through it. But right now you do have to do separate. So we're available to help someone look at that and then start like planning maybe even beyond these things. If this was to come through or this was not, what would you maybe look at? What are other resources in the area? That's definitely the pocket that we want to be in. What I don't want you to give the impression is they can't come to our office and go into 6 different systems unless they spend 3 hours with us and we put them into each system. Like there's no way around applying multiple places and then having to do the follow-up multiple places. It's the only way for these agencies to get their money out fast is for them to keep their systems in-house. And fast is relative. It's still the federal government, fast on some of these things. But that's my caution. It's like we're definitely here to help, but we can't. It is what it is at some level. It's more just like encouraging people to stay in it. Don't give up. Don't do something else that will hurt your situation. That's what we're coaching someone through.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Good. I think we have a few more questions. Do we, Billy?
We do. Someone had asked if someone's already applied for rental assistance and received it, can they apply again?
So the answer to that is yes, pretty much. If they've already applied for assistance that is duplicating, then no. But they could have received, say, 3 months in CARES funding and then now be another 6 months behind that they can apply for under this funding.
And that will be the same with the statewide program for anyone outside of Winnebago, same thing. Any funding that they got previously will be taken out of anything, but if they, they again have a gap or they have some future need, they can get up to 3 months. So the way that the statewide program is, you can receive up to 15 months of assistance, but they'll subtract out any assistance you've already received from that 15 months. So.
Thank
And
you.
I would just say from the legal side, tenants need to document everything as much as possible in writing, even if it's just a matter of keeping a journal and writing down what they're doing. Emails, text messages, anything in writing that they're doing to seek out rent assistance, to cooperate with their landlord. One of the important things in making sure you're protected by the moratorium as a covered person is that you, in order to fit the definition of a covered person, are making your best efforts to make timely payments that you can afford. And, I think it goes a long way in showing, if you go to court, that you are making your best efforts to work with the landlord or seek out rent assistance programs. And so from the legal side, trying to prove things in court, tenants need to document everything as much as possible.
Great, thank you.
Another question, someone had asked, when the moratorium ends, will utilities be shut off, or can they be shut off? They have some program participants that owe, for example, $900 in back water bills that they've been unable to pay.
So let me take this one as well, because there is some news on the waterfront. There is a CARES water grant coming down. It will be run sort of in partnership with the LIHEAP Utility Assistance Program. We do anticipate, we're waiting for the state to release those funds. As soon as they're out, we will get that word out. It will be for water and wastewater. So Rock River Water Reclamation District would also be eligible under those funds. We expect them to drop almost any day now. We are working with Rock River Water Reclamation District and the various water departments to make sure we have a coordinated response. One of the issues within the city of Rockford is that water bills are in the landlord's name. So that's one of the issues we've been trying to address at the state level. That has been addressed in the Treasury program, which also allows for water and other utility assistance. There is still LIHEAP assistance available out there. People, even if they've already received a LIHEAP benefit, if they need more assistance, they should call our office, because we have been given additional funds to provide additional assistance beyond the original allocation. So even if they've applied, if they're still behind, encourage them to call us.
And Jennifer, can I add something of interest to everybody? I think is that internet will be included in that emergency rental assistance.
And it might be important to distinguish between the IDA funds and the emergency rent assistance funds, in that I'm not sure that the IDA funds will be available to people who are in subsidized housing, for example, or for, that utilities come up a lot of times with people who are in subsidized housing, even if they've gotten an adjustment of rent. If they've fallen behind on their utilities, it can put them at risk of eviction also. And so the emergency rent assistance, Alan, Sarah, anybody else besides me probably could say for sure, but the emergency rent assistance, I believe, applies to the subsidized tenants as well, and provides utility assistance there.
The Treasury Department put out an FAQ, Jesse, because they're just like us, they're learning as they go along, and they're saying that it can be used by subsidized residents in public housing and voucher programs, but only for their part of the rent.
And the way the FAQ reads too is the Treasury allows the money to be used for rent and or utilities, but each program will have to decide the design of their program and what, so like Winnebago County could decide the design of their program and what they're going to cover. The state can do the same thing. And IDA, again, has not released what they're paying. And I don't know if Bob knows more. I think last time it was, they covered rent. So if your rent covered utilities, like if your landlord bundled it in, you were good. But there wasn't like a separate utility type of thing. I don't know what IDA's leaning towards deciding this time around.
I'm actually not certain of that. I believe that the IDA dollars are focused on rent assistance. There are other resources to help people pay utilities, but I believe the DHS dollars will help cover rent assistance. And actually, and what is the answer about the Winnebago County dollars, Jennifer, about utilities?
Yeah, as Alan mentioned, we will be able to pay utilities and water and internet under the Winnebago County program.
Excellent. Right, and internet, that's something that's obviously hasn't historically been considered a utility, but obviously we're all, those of us that are fortunate enough to have it are using it, all day, every day to be on these types of meetings and kind of do everything. So it is, it's really become
Critical, yeah.
the human need, for better or worse.
So true. Great, thanks. Billy, do we have any other questions?
We have one more question. Someone had asked, there are some people that have been able to work the entire time during COVID but have chosen not to pay for rent. So they wanted to know if people that chose not to pay for rent would be eligible for funds, or what evidence people might need to provide regarding financial need.
And Jesse, you spoke to this a little bit. Do you want to expound on that again?
Well, I think if people choose not to pay their rent as some sort of strategic decision, rather than out of necessity because of a COVID-related hardship, they may not qualify as a covered person in the definition of the legal moratorium against evictions. And in terms of qualifying for rent assistance, I guess I'd defer to Sarah or Jennifer or somebody else. But my inclination from what I've heard would be that they probably don't qualify for these emergency assistance if they didn't have the COVID-related hardship.
I would say for the statewide program last time, all you had to do was it was literally on your honor. You just said, I have a COVID-related reason, checked the box and docu-signed it. And again, that was getting money out fast, and it was a smaller, it was only up to $5,000. This time, the rent assistance at the state level can go up to $20,000, and you will have to justify it. There will be paperwork that you'll have to show and document that you had a COVID-related loss of income, and that was why.
People should be careful to sign documents where they're interpreting things liberally as a COVID-related hardship. I think if a lot of times these agreements or these documents do require that you sign certain things under penalty of perjury by verification. So any knowing lies could, technically submit somebody to criminal prosecution. Although, I don't know that I've seen anything like that. I would just say be careful if you're signing those.
Good.
So one thing we've done at the Winnebago County level is we will have staff who will be following up with each applicant. And that will allow us the opportunity to have those conversations about, is this truly COVID related, and how that fits in. It's an extra component that I think will make a big difference in making sure the right people get as much help as they can.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. So let's just transition a little bit to advocacy and what role we might play as a sector, the nonprofit sector, in supporting low-income individuals that might be facing homelessness. We heard a lot of really good information. Sarah, I love the thought of training people to be calm and have negotiation skills, having many case managers on this call today as coaches for individuals. We talked about how eviction can push people to poverty, that housing is such a stabilizer. How might we, as a sector, is there a way to come together and maybe even with landlords at the table? It'd be interesting to hear your conversation about that. How we begin to, how we can advocate as a group, as a block, and what we would advocate for. And I know, Bob, that's part of what you do as well. But we have 70 people on this call, and maybe there are ways that we might all work more closely together. Any thoughts?
Well, I put the link to the bill we're working on, an action alert for those of you who can take action personally or at your job, either way works, but there's just information too if you're not, don't want to take action for whatever reason or not able to. And also a fact sheet on this bill. I think, again, the hope is, with all this rent assistance and utility assistance and assistance for people experiencing homelessness, and with the, hopefully the pandemic, because of the availability of vaccines, coming close to being resolved, at least, during the course of this year, that, long term, again, we have to solve the underlying, lack of affordable housing and increasing people's incomes so they can pay rent, and doing both of those is, and doing that for people who are, at risk of homelessness or homeless, and for renters or home buyers. And so I think this time does provide an opportunity to kind of, I know from the General Assembly down in Springfield, although they're mostly still meeting remotely, I think there's a lot more interest in affordable housing as an issue. And there's a new housing committee in the House of Representatives that's totally focused on this issue, and there are many bills that were introduced on it. And then I think in Congress, and people advocate with them. I think earlier, maybe it was Ellen, talked about, if we could get to a place where housing, we thought of it not just as, something that was so, and Sarah talked about this too, not something that was just kind of a, people have to compete yet, but it was actually available as just, a basic human need, more like how food stamps are, the SNAP program, where if you're eligible, you can apply. And again, maybe it doesn't meet all your needs, but it just kind of ensures that you don't go hungry. And if we had, thought of housing in the same way as a public, good, that would be a better society. So.
And then just to build on that, and then go to what Alan was talking about earlier, to make sure to call that out. One of the key tools that can be used in housing to answer some of this need are the vouchers. And it's that helping, because housing is right now something that we trade on open market, like it's something that we're reliant on to have private investment in to make sure it's exists and is caught up. Do we want in the next year for the government to build enough houses for everybody? It's not feasible, right? Or those sorts of things. But a lot of need could be solved if we had and advocated for more money in vouchers being given to the housing authorities, to be given to people to live in apartments all throughout our city, our counties, all those sorts of things. If we gave people a sense of secure housing, so that, because that's where you go to bed at night and wake up on time for your job the next day or for school the next day, that's your health resource. And I think if we're coming out of COVID, if we can all use this experience of all of a sudden, very quickly, we were able to realize that housing was a public health issue. If we don't lose that, and we think what would be the best momentum, to me, one of the vouchers are a key thing, the subsidies that Jennifer and other people are able to offer to keep people housed and start them on a more stable path. Obviously, I'm in housing, and I think it's the core and the thing that people, the place that everything jumps out of. So I think but I think at one point in time, I heard 1% of the military budget would solve our housing voucher waiting lists across the country. 1% of the military budget. So it's thinking through, when we come out of this, the priorities of how we're treating people and how we're treating our neighbors and our friends, and where we're advocating for our priorities when we're talking to ourselves, all those different things. But like vouchers would really stabilize a lot of an increase in vouchers would really, really stabilize things.
Sarah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, and people are talking about advocacy, and maybe Bob can help me with this. But Bob, I think the Housing Committee is looking at Bill 2775, which would expand the prohibition against source of income that exists in Cook County.
That's right. Yeah. So, and this is something, and Alan, you've helped out with this in the past, but for the issue is, and this is the law currently in Chicago and Cook County and a handful of other places in Illinois, like Naperville and in the Champaign-Urbana area, but it's part of the fair housing law that you can't discriminate against people based on their legal source of income. And in most places that includes like getting a rental subsidy from somewhere like a housing choice voucher. And it's not, again, it's not a mandate that landlords have to rent to people with vouchers. It's just really saying you can't have a blanket policy that you don't rent to them. And you have to, look at their application like you would anyone else and check their references and look at their credit and, talk to them, find out their situation. So we have, over the years, tried to pass this at the state level. Admittedly, there has been a lot of opposition from groups that represent rental property owners, like the realtors and others. So if they were on the Zoom meeting and they were presenting, they would, share their issues with this, but they're not. So you'll have to ask them later. But we think this is a good policy change. Again, it exists in many places. The rental market is still functioning, and actually even in the places, admittedly, where this is the law, compliance is not excellent. And there are lots of tenants who get turned down just because they have a voucher, and similar to these communities that have this type of law around the country. But this policy change is something that's a step in the right direction. And I'll in the chat I'll put a link to the bill.
Great. So our time is coming to a close, but I don't want to close without each of you having an opportunity to give your maybe 60 or 90 seconds of what I want people to hear more than anything from this conversation. So Jennifer, how about we start with you?
Okay, so what I want people to hear is the program is starting soon. We'll be doing lots of press around it. Please encourage people to apply as needed. One note that did not come up is landlords can also start the application process for their tenants. The tenants do have to complete the process, but our portal will be available to both landlords and tenants. The other thing is, if people do get evicted and become homeless, please give our homeless hotline a call so we can help them get rehoused as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Excellent. Laura, how about you?
I think it's all about collaboration. I think if we've learned one thing today is that there are several programs out there that are looking out for the betterment of the client, being the resident, and the landlord. But it doesn't do any good to have those programs if nobody knows that they exist. So I think it's all of us being willing to come together to collaborate, to support and promote. So I would ask that, maybe everybody that's signed up today, that maybe we get a distribution list. So that way, when these programs do come out, when IDA does say what their criteria is going to be, that we can do an email blast so that everybody can promote and talk about the same information and really get the word out there. So
great, thanks for sharing, and we will make sure that you all get a list. Thank you. Bob, how about you?
Oh, well, I was just looking for that link so I could put it in the chat, but I don't think I have anything to add to what I already said. So maybe I'll let anyone else who hasn't talked yet close.
Fair enough. Thanks. Sarah?
Completely agree with what Laura said. Like, all of us getting everything out and understanding where to go for what is so important. But if you don't, just ask any one of us. We can refer to each other. We know each other. We'll do what we can to get you to the best program. And then for Home Start and our offices, starting mid-April on, we would be available. If you're working with a direct group of people and you want us to come and help your clients with their intake, we can set up a mobile site. We bring our own internet, we bring everything there, and we can come and work with you. Last time around for the rent assistance, we hosted events at different sites, and we were able to pay for translators. Our staff speaks English and Spanish, but we hired for Swahili Karen, Farsi, Arabic, anything that we needed to. So I know there's a whole variety of people. Most of you aren't on camera, so I can't see you. But depending on who you work with, HomeStart would be available to get you just some access and some more computers and some more things, whatever it is you need. So just keep us in mind if you need anything.
Great. Jesse?
Well, thanks to everybody, and thanks for all the questions too. I would just say there's help out there generally, that there's rent assistance available and legal services available. We don't charge for our advice or for our in-court representation negotiations. We don't charge anything to our clients. And so people can apply for our services on our website, pslegal.org. They can apply through illinoislegalaid.org, or they can apply by calling our 800 number or our local office number. People, if they have legal questions, should just call and we can screen them for eligibility and provide advice. And that includes anything from I'm behind on my rent and I don't know what to do. Should I fill out this declaration? Do I qualify? To what do I do because my landlord, won't fix X, Y, or Z. I have a conditions issue. Should I withhold rent? I saw that there was a question about withholding rent, and I would just address that real fast, that I usually don't advise clients to withhold rent because there's a very specific statute in Illinois, the Rental or Residential Tenant Rights to Repair Act, has a very precise process that tenants are supposed to follow in order to sort of legally offset or withhold rent to make repairs. So, but any of those legal issues, if somebody has questions, please apply for services. We are trying to bulk up our resources to provide at least advice over the phone or here in the office with our staff attorneys.
Thanks, Jesse. And Alan?
Thanks, Pam. Yeah, everybody, please feel free to take advantage of our site to look at the housing that's available. It's NICNE.org, and you can see where it's very easy to navigate and look across the 6-county area. And then also Jennifer and Aquanet's program at Human Services serves as a entry portal for a number of our voucher programs as well that's available. And, I just had to add that Sarah says it so well that you need an address to have a bank account, to, for school, for work. It's such a basic need. And I'm so grateful of all the people who are on this call today who are so caring about that. We all know a human story of somebody who's affected by this. Thank you.
Yeah. And so thank you all. Thank all the panelists for sharing your wisdom and your expertise. We are deeply grateful. And to those of you on the call, utilize these community and regional experts, right? They are available to you, and you allow your participants, your clients, encourage them, direct them to these incredible resources in the community. Again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us today. Billy, I don't know if you have a little commercial or anything that you want to share before we end, but I just cannot thank you enough for this information. I would love to continue our conversation on how we can maybe as a group begin to advocate as housing is a public health issue and come together and work together on that particular topic. So thank you all. Billy, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. I do want to share that I will be sending all of the links shared in today's chat, the contact information for today's speakers, and the recording to the event in an email to you following today's session. So please watch for that. I don't know if you noticed in the chat, but there is also a housing advocacy session being hosted by the Salvation Army from noon to 1 today. So I put the chat, the link in the chat for that if you'd like to register, and they will be having a discussion around housing insecurity and programs that they have and resources that they have to address that need in our community and our region. I do want to share a little bit of information about events that we have coming up at NICNE. We have a Courageous Conversations Facilitator training tomorrow. There is still room to register for that. So if you'd like to do that, I will share the information, that follow-up email. It is in the morning from 9 to 11. We would love to have you there. that will help you lead and engage in productive conversations around social justice and racial justice issues. And it's going to be led by Tracy Ellis, who is a member of Candid Conversations Matter. I will also share information with you about NICNE's Certificate in Nonprofit Management Program. So if you are in nonprofit leadership or hope to be or aspire to be someday, that may be something that you are interested in. So I'll share that with you as well. Again, thank you, everybody, and we hope you have a fantastic day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.